Inspiring Philosophy made a couple of videos about free will that don't really seem to make much sense to me. Permit me to demonstrate.
This may come to a big surprise for some determinists, but libertarians do not say things are not determined. We just say they are determined by the choices of agents.
Yes, but what determines the choices of agents? If nothing determines the choices of agents, how is that different from being random? You're just pushing randomness off a step. You're saying, we're not saying that events are undetermined, we're saying that they are determined by the choices of agents, which are ultimately undetermined.
Which causally affect other things. And this is what quantum mechanics tells us. In our last video, we talked about the free will theorem a bit, and the fact that a particle's position cannot be predicted before an outside observer decides how to measure it. If this is the case, as the experimental results show, then an outside observer must introduce new information into the system for a result to actually happen, which is what libertarians say. Outcomes are determined just not by prior or random events, but by agents who lie outside what we see as physical reality.
I'm not sure I see any practical difference between an event which is the result of agent causation and an event which is the product of probability. Let's say you have two events. One of those events is caused by an agent, and the other of those events is the result of a process that is not random, but not wholly determined either, an event which is the product of probability. How could you tell which is which? And what criteria could you say that event was the product of an agent, and the other was the result of probability? Or let's say that there are two people, one with free will and one without. In the one with free will, his choices proceed in the way that IP describes. They are partly influenced by prior thoughts and experiences, and otherwise determined by an agent. But for the other person without free will, his thoughts are partly influenced by prior thoughts and partly the result of chance rather than an agent. How could you tell which is which? Let's say you could even have the subjective experience of being the person with free will, then the experience of the person without free will. How would those experiences differ? I don't see how they would differ at all. And if those experiences wouldn't differ, I don't see why we should assume the involvement of an agent rather than chance. I really don't see the difference between a choice which is determined by an agent and a choice which is the result of probability. If you can't tell the difference between these two things, on what basis can you say that this is even a real distinction? Inspiring Philosophy says that we all feel as though we have free will, but I don't. I don't feel at all like thoughts are the product of anything but previous thoughts and perceptions and maybe a bit of chance. Aside from those, I don't have any sense whatsoever of the existence of an independent self or an agent who determines what thoughts will occur. It's not just that I don't choose my desires and motivations, I don't even feel like I choose my thoughts, what I'm going to focus on, whether I'm going to focus on something, or what I'm going to think about. I don't feel like there is even an I in that sense that chooses anything that the mind does. If my thoughts were really the product of a conscious agent, then that agent would consciously work out what each thought is going to be before I think it. But this obviously doesn't happen. I don't consciously decide what each thought is going to be before I think it. Thoughts just occur. And even if there is some agent bringing thoughts into being, it is not doing so consciously. If it were creating thoughts consciously, it would deliberately work out what each thought would be before that thought occurs. And as I said, this obviously doesn't happen. And since that's the case, I don't see how these thoughts are the product of a conscious entity that is distinct from the thoughts themselves. Rather, it seems to me that thoughts and experiences are consciousness rather than the product of consciousness. Thoughts and experiences are the self rather than the product of the self. Since that's the case, the only meaningful sense in which we can say that we make conscious choices is by saying that those choices are determined by prior events. That is, the thoughts that preceded them. So either choices are determined by prior conscious deliberation, in which case they are not free, or those choices are not consciously made.